Hello, welcome to Nonprofit Program Planning and Evaluation. I'm Charles McElveen. Welcome to Lesson 4, Theory of Change, Interventions, and Rationales. There are 4 outcomes in this lesson. The first outcome is to develop contextualized best practice interventions and activities. That is, what has been proven to work well for your participants in their situation. The second thing is to establish the rationale behind the choice you made for the intervention activity, as well as the particular place in the outcome pathway that you place this activity. The third outcome is to establish your theological rationale if you're in a Christian organization, or a values rationale if you're in a secular organization, including explaining why that place is at a particular point in the outcomes pathway. The fourth outcome is you're going to explain the relationship between your program's purpose and its role in fulfilling and advancing the organization's overall mission, vision, and values. So let's dive into this topic. When it comes to establishing best practice interventions and activities, there's no substitute for doing good research. And there's different ways you can find out where these best practice interventions are occurring. Here are 3 different ways you can do that. The first is to find out what other organizations with similar programs are doing. Now, in this instance, you'll want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples to some extent. And also, what are some of the premier organizations doing as well? Oftentimes, you'll find innovation at the smallest organizations in unexpected ways, as well as you'll be able to find innovation also, most likely, in the larger organizations because of the budgets that they employ. So, looking at other organizations is a great first start. The second is to look at literature, such as trade publications and academic journals. And lastly, there's curated clearinghouse-type websites. So let's review some of these to get a feel for how each category represents itself. One of the ways you can get to this is by going online and looking at a great resource called Charity Navigator. Now, in this instance, I use an example, which was the Union Gospel Mission Twin Cities. And right away, it gives us a rating profile of their financial score and their accountability and transparency. Now, this is only as good as the information that's going into it. So a question, if you're a donor, which you're not at this point, would be to find out how this information is going into the system. The second thing you'll be able to find out is programs. Now, this gives you a good sense of where your organization will fit. So when it comes to men's programs at the Union Gospel Mission Twin City, approximately $5.5 million is going into the budget. Almost 50% of its total budget is being used to support men's programming. So you compare how much you're spending at your organization to how much they're spending. That's going to give you a pretty good feel of where you're at as far as compatibility or comparability to program measurements. You can look at the historical ratings and the IRS filings. I think the most important one for you is going to be this program tab right here. Now, there are other online resources that you can look at as well. So let's turn to GuideStar here. And in GuideStar, it's a little different approach, but it still gives you a lot of great information, maybe even more so than Charity Navigator. So in this example, I went to GuideStar.org and I typed in Union Gospel Mission Twin Cities. And the first thing that comes up, of course, is the name and its EIN and a short description of what it provides. But what I'd like you to take a look at is to notice the gross receipts. In this case, we're talking almost $20 million. So right away, there seems to be a disconnect between these two sites. And one side, you've got $5.6 million or so going to men's programs, about 50% of their budget, their operating budget for programs. And here, it would be about $20 million. If you say half, you'd be expecting $10 million. So that's one thing to keep in mind. not so much disparity, but keep in mind the idea that data is only as good as the data entry. So just keep that in mind. So if your organization is doing $10 million, it may not be a one-to-one correlation here. It may not be an apples to apples, but you can still find out what they're doing and have a comparison. And when you go into the website, you can drill down, it can give you a little bit more information of when it began, who the CEO is, and then there's subject areas. So again, this is going to give you a little bit more information as you're looking for a place to research a specific program idea you may have. And here's another page from that same organization. This goes on, by the way, for several screens as I was scrolling through here. So you can see down here at the bottom, you can see the shelter program, educational services, addiction recovery. There's several more fields below this that you can click on that'll show you all the different areas that they're involved in. So Charity and Navigator and GuideStar are two very good resources as a beginning point to find out who is doing what you're doing and who may be at approximately the same level that you're working at. Another one is to look at professional affiliations or organizational affiliations. Now, primarily we're talking rescue missions here in our setting, but this could be any nonprofit. If you're a nonprofit that's working with holistic programs, you could still tap into these networks, because these networks, especially if they're in your town, are going to be able to give you some good benchmarking as well. So here we have the Citygate network, and right in this section here, you'll see that you can connect to the different missions and ministries that are out there connected with Citygate network, as well as different businesses. Now, these are going to be largely for-profit entities that are connected with Citygate. And then we have individuals themselves. So Citygate is a good place to connect, one step removed from Charity Navigator and GuideStar. And then another place that you can look is the Gospel Rescue Mission Fellowship, and you can find their member organizations here. So when you're wondering how to build your program and you're trying to find what other people are doing, start with Charity Navigator, go to GuideStar, find organizations that are similar to yours, go out to those organizational websites, drop into these affiliations to help you make contacts with people that are working with the same type of client you're working with, maybe the same sort of context or demographic size, same city size, or even environment. Another tool you have is by contacting other organizations. Now, here's an example of the Atlanta Rescue Mission, and you can see that they've divided their approach into 5 different areas or disciplines: physical, emotional, spiritual, social, and vocational. Underneath those, they've got different components that make up that category. So, for instance, we're talking a person's spiritual health. The Atlanta Rescue Mission says, okay, well, that's important. We talk about faith, discipleship, and church. All those things are important for spiritual health. Or an emotional health, mental health, trauma healing, addiction restoration, hope. Now, you could probably just Google rescue mission and have access to, all 150, 200 missions that are out there, upwards of 300. And you'll be able to drill down into their program structures and find this same sort of information. Another tool that you have for establishing your benchmarks, to identifying your best practices, your best interventions, is to look at trade publications. Now, I say trade publications. Homelessness is not a trade. You and I both know that. But this is a category that deals with this whole topic of social issues: homelessness, poverty, food insecurity. So some of the top running publications out there are going to be the Stanford Social Innovation Review and the Harvard Business Review. 2 very good journals, trade publications. They're not free. It will cost you to be a member. I believe they're about $100 a year, I think, is what these are. But the payoff is access to just a tremendous amount of resources. Other publications, the Nonprofit Quarterly, the Nonprofit Times, two very good type of publications that will give you much more information than perhaps surfing the web. The last one comes out of the federal government, and that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And what's noteworthy about this is that there, of course, I'm sure most of you know that there's a very strong correlation between mental illness and chemical dependency. And, we call these dual diagnosis, and it's very difficult to separate one from another oftentimes with people that are dually diagnosed. So this administration has got a wealth of information out there, but it's all created by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Now there are journals, academic journals. And what's important to note about the journals versus the trade publications is the trade publications, by and large, are generated by practitioners, people that are in the field working hands-on. Whereas the journals are more, I won't say necessarily theoretical, but they're very academic. In other words, they take the long view. You may have an academic researcher who wants to know more about a specific aspect of a social issue and may conduct research into 100 different organizations to develop hypotheses, and then to prove those hypotheses, to develop theories, and they'll even discuss, where they got their information, other publications that influenced them, interviews that they reached. So academic journals are a pretty good place that you'll be able to find good benchmarked activities, because a lot of the benchmarking and mining of the proven activities and interventions has already been done for you. These are only 4 journals. There are many, many journals out there in publication. So we have the Journal of Social Issues, Social Problems, the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, Behavior and Social Issues. You'll find journals that are targeted towards poverty, specifically homelessness, addiction, whatever your sub-focus or sub-interest is, you'll be able to find a journal that addresses or focuses upon that issue. So many of these are going to be the steps that you'll follow as you try and identify best practices. And here's an example. Here's a website. This is a SAMHSA website. So you remember that I spoke about the dual diagnosis of mental health connected with substance abuse. So here's an example of where we've got recovery housing best practices and suggested guidelines. And so that taps right into addiction recovery programs, as well as housing itself and homelessness. So it's a great resource, and I really encourage you to seek out SAMHSA as you're working through interventions. Let's turn to some different clearinghouse websites. So one of those is rescuemissioncurriculum.org. And what is noteworthy about this site is that you'll find specific topics. For instance, if you're in your program and you're thinking about, okay, I know what kind of information I want to create. I know what type of intervention I wish to develop. What curriculum would go along with that? And you could go through the same sort of process in identifying the curriculum itself, which would be, other rescue missions, other organizations, trade pubs, journals, that kind of thing. Or you could hit a website like this, and you'll find topics in Bible, or courses where college credit is available, programs in finances, job readiness, recovery, sex and relationships. And this is a free site here, and this one is growing all the time. And so what's notable about this site is it's being developed as we here at City Vision University speak to more and more missions and find out what they're doing. we post these materials, especially when we have commonality. If we're finding that a majority of missions are using a very specific curriculum, then we're going to put that up here on this link. So there's no use in reinventing the wheel. If you have an interest, go here. It's a great first part to checking out your activities or developing curriculum for your activities. And then we have the City Vision Institute. Very similar. These courses are free as well. And some of these can be converted over to college credit. So if you get people that are like within a program, they're higher level, for instance, they may be on their way out the door, they're graduating, you may wish to look at one of these programs, or educational programs within City Vision Institute. So don't reinvent the wheel, by all means. All right, so that is identifying all the best practices that you may wish to bring into your program, or different aspects you may wish to bring as you create a program. When it comes to identifying an intervention, that becomes more difficult because now you have to defend and explain why you are choosing the path you are choosing. And it really comes down to two questions based upon your goals and your outcomes. And here they are. It's why is the intervention important to this program? And the second is, why should it be in a specific place or time in the program? So if you're going to have, for instance, Genesis, you may use that program, and you'll have to explain why you're going to use Genesis in your program. And it's philosophical, but could also be from a cost perspective as well. Maybe it fits most of your values, and it's a lot less expensive to buy that off the shelf than it is to try and build something internally your own. And then the second thing is, why should it be in a specific place in the program? Why does it occur where it does? For instance, why do you believe that Genesis should be right at the beginning of the program? Or if you place it in the middle of the program, why should it be there, or even at the end? So what is the intervention? Why is it there? Why is it important? Why should it be in a specific place in your program? And then there's a theological or values rationale. And here we have two questions again. And it hits if you're in a faith-based organization or a secular organization. And especially for Christian faith-based organization, where guarding biblical values and a biblical ethos is absolutely paramount to the organization maintain its identity, it's to be able to identify the biblical foundation for the intervention itself. The second, in what ways does that foundation support the selection of a particular intervention? For instance, we go back to Genesis. It's a faith program. So in there is going to be the biblical-based values for the intervention, and it will also further the values of the organization or of the program, especially in a faith-based setting, because of its theological underpinnings. And that comes down to, in what ways does the intervention mesh with the organization values? Well, if the organization is faith-based, then I'm assuming it's going to want to leverage faith-centered types of materials. So being able to explain that is going to be important when you're presenting a program plan. If you're not in a faith-based organization, you still have to discuss why the intervention meshes with the organization's values. So you're going to have to, again, talk about why you chose this and where you placed it, and then how it fits with the values of the organization. Okay, that is it for this week. We will see you next time for Lesson 5.